Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown. Like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone. Riders on the storm, there's a killer on the road. His brain is squirming like a toad. Take a long holiday.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a rainy day on the Pacific Northwest, and both my guest and myself live in this area. So I'd like to introduce retired Colonel Bill Reeder. So thank you, Bill, for taking the time today. Now, you have a great deal of interesting history, and I would like to tell people that if they want to know the full story of your life, that you had an interview with Jocko where you went from basically early school days where you were a very active young man at school. And so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. But again, you can find the whole story of Bill's life on Jocko. Forgive me for not knowing the number. Do you know the number of the?
Oh, shoot, I don't want to give out the wrong one. I think it was 64, but
Okay.
Don't hold me to that. Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
No
and then
problem.
I've actually had two on with Jocko, so there's another one too. Yeah, you go up on
Great.
Jocko's website and search for my name, I think, and find it.
Yeah, that's what I actually watched for this interview or chat. So your first, I'm going to jump right into the deep end here. Your first tour in Vietnam, you were a Mohawk pilot. So did you always, and you, this is an important factor, is you joined up. You weren't drafted. You felt it was the right thing to do. And you were living in a very nice part of the world that I've been to, the San Fernando Valley. So that's quite a nice area of the world.
Yeah, I grew up largely in the San Fernando Valley and all around that area. I was living down in the Santa Monica area when I walked to the recruiter in Santa Monica, California, and enlisted in August of 1965. Yep.
Wow. And so what made you want to be a pilot? Was that your objective, that you wanted to learn how to fly?
I love to fly. I was always intrigued with flying. Didn't have a bunch of experience as a real young man. Had my first airline flight. I think I was 14 years old. But once I started working, I was an apprentice lineman with Southern California Edison and started taking flying lessons at the Santa Monica Airport and got a number of hours. I didn't have enough to get my private license yet, but I had a number of hours of flight instruction when I went and enlisted in the Army. Just to tie up the flying end of it, I would have loved to have been a pilot. I knew there were only two services where you could fly without a college degree. That was the Army and the Marine Corps. I first went to the Marine Corps, took a series of tests. They said I scored very highly for flight aptitude, and they would guarantee me flight training. And all I would have to do was pass a flight physical. Well, before I did that, I went to a FAA flight surgeon in Santa Monica and said, hey, give me what would I have to pass in the military? Came out, my eyes were 20/25 with astigmatism. So I was told I would not pass the Marine Corps physical or an Army physical. So I enlisted with a guarantee of airborne, with the idea at that time of trying to get into special forces once I got in the Army, with no idea I could ever fly. I had written that off.
Wow. And so just to educate myself, did you have a choice of what kind of plane that you were put into, or you got your fixed wing, that you were approved, or, your pilot's license? Did you have a choice of what you wanted to fly, or they just said, no, Bill, you're going here?
No, so in the military, yeah, in the Army, I was thinking I was never going to fly. I went through basic training, advanced training, had an opportunity to go to officer candidate school, got a commission as a lieutenant in artillery, and I was at Fort Carson, Colorado as an artillery officer in an artillery assignment. Went down for an annual physical, and wham, it came out 20/20 in both eyes. I grabbed that up, ran to the flight surgeon, and that's how I got into flight school. Now, in answer to your question, the Army just gave me orders for fixed wing flight school. In those days, we had fixed wing and rotor. We had two separate flight schools. I went into fixed wing, and I assumed that was because I had some fixed wing hours with my pre-service flight training. So I didn't have a choice of going in if I was fixed or rotary. In flight school, I saw and learned about this airplane called an OV-1 Mohawk, built by Grumman Aircraft. It was the fanciest thing the U.S. Army had, a very sophisticated, capable aircraft, and I just fell in love with it and dreamed of someday being able to fly that aircraft. I did well enough in flight school that I was one of the few students in our class picked to go on to the advanced aircraft qualification in the Mohawk. That's how I ended up in that airplane.
And now, if you wanted to, could you have gone into jets with further flight instruction?
In the Army, no. At
Okay.
that time, the Army had no jets, just helicopters and propeller fixed wing. And of course, the Mohawk was turboprop. So no opportunity for jets then. Years later, and now we have some jet aircraft for essentially VIP transport kind of missions, which was not my thing anyway.
So for the Mohawk, this is a two-seater plane. So clearly that you were the pilot. Now the other gentleman, what were his duties? Because you were saying, and I assume from the interviews that I've heard you do, that you were flying over the Uncle Ho's trail there. So were there cameras aboard and that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, it's known as a surveillance airplane, surveillance reconnaissance capabilities. It has a suite of cameras. There were three models, A, B, and C. The A models were fitted with a suite of cameras. The B models had a side-looking airborne radar. It was a radar that could go out to several miles. About 30 miles was the distant range. We generally work it in closer than that. It would spot anything moving on a road or trail going over about 3 miles an hour and give you near real-time feedback in the cockpit of the movement and where it was located. The third system in our C models was a infrared system that would see directly below the aircraft. We would employ those missions at night, generally low altitude, 2,000, preferably 1,000 feet above the ground, to be able to pick out those heat signatures of those targets. So those were the surveillance reconnaissance capabilities on board the aircraft.
Now, most recon planes, to my knowledge, they because they wanted to keep the speed up, they weren't really like heavily armed. Did you have any armaments at all?
Yeah, we did. And I smile because it's an interesting question. We had armament only because of our special mission. There were 5 Mohawk companies in Vietnam, and many will know that Vietnam was divided into 4 core tactical areas, geographic regions. There was one Mohawk company in support of each of those cores. That left us, the 5th company, with a special mission. We were under the operational control of the highest headquarters in the land, MACV J2, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and then it was their intel section, the J2, that tasked our missions. The only time we saw South Vietnam for most of the war, it changed a little bit at the end, but for most of the war, and while I was there, the only time we saw South Vietnam was for takeoffs and landings. All of our missions were classified out of country into Laos over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, along the coast of North Vietnam. And then I had one very highly classified mission into Cambodia in late 1969 that it turned out was collecting some information that would later be used for the Cambodian or invasion of Cambodia. So the missions were all very classified for years, for decades. When people would say, "Hey, what'd you do in the Vietnam War?" I'd say, "Well, I flew Mohawks and it was great, and that's about all I can tell you about it." Only over the last several years has that information been declassified, particularly some of the work we did in what was later known as the CIA's secret war in Laos. And that allowed me to just publish my most recent book, which just came out November 5th, on my Mohawk missions in Laos, North Vietnam, and Cambodia on my first tour.
And so we should really tell the public what will your book be called? What is the book called? Sorry, not will be.
The book is called, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
We Dared to Fly.
Wow.
And as I told you earlier, I'm not so much pushing books because and anybody
Yeah.
that's done much writing, you don't make a lot of money unless you're some big time, top of the list guys that sell books. We don't make much money, but we think these are important stories.
Yeah.
And this is an important story about the OV-1 Mohawk, especially this special mission unit and those at the time highly classified missions that we flew over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, North Vietnam, and Cambodia. So we dared to fly, just released November the 5th.
Now, you can say yes or no. Are we allowed to say that there'll be okay? I'll say this in a different way. There will, in the near future, there will be another interview that you'll be able to explain more about that book with a well-known podcaster. Is that kind of skirting the?
No, that's true. And we're not going to give the name of this podcaster, former retired Navy SEAL team commander, but it will be coming out. Yes.
And so now, as I told you off air and the emails that we've had back and forth, most of the people, or all the people that I know, are to do with SOG. So you were, and of course they had an NDA that they had to sign. Did you or your fellow pilots, because that you were going into those classified areas, did you have to sign an NDA?
No, but we had to sign, you get a security clearance. We signed, you'll not disclose that to anyone that doesn't have a need to know. And that pretty well shut down any of those discussions. Most of our missions were secret. Some were top secret. So I had to get read on to special programs for those missions. Yeah, I mean, it's not called an NDA, but it's fairly specific that you don't utter one word of this mission to anybody. There was a mission that was really super sensitive and highly classified that I flew out of Tan Son Nhut into Cambodia. It was at a time we weren't flying into Cambodia at all. And this thing, I did have to sign a statement that was totally separate from security clearance, that essentially was almost like something out of Mission Impossible, where the tape disintegrates at the end of the briefing. And these aren't the exact, this is very much paraphrased, but yeah, I will, the United States will not acknowledge that I'm flying where I'm flying. If I should be captured, or shot down and captured, I would claim navigational error. There'll be no attempt to rescue you from this mission, all that kind of stuff. That was so super secret, and the name of the program was French Leave, and I was really sensitive about it in writing my latest book. But it's amazing the amount of stuff that has been declassified of late. I've gotten a hold of CIA documents from CIA websites that have declassified stamped on those documents. You may have seen some of the same thing. And for this particular program, French Leave, I found documents that have this completely declassified now. So I'm very comfortable talking about it.
Until you hear that knock at the door. But that must be very.
I'll tell you not to divulge a name, but I may suffer with interrogation if they come after me. But in our missions, flying Mohawks, and we worked with some CIA guys in Laos, supporting their operations. And I was able to track down a couple of guys that I actually worked with. In fact, I got a picture of one of the guys in my latest book, a real renowned CIA operative. And as I was interviewing one guy, again, not to be named or steered in any direction, but I said, "Hey, you think I'm okay putting this in my book?" And he said something along the lines that at my age, I really don't give a damn. What are they going to do to me? But no, we haven't disclosed any sensitive national secrets that are still being held at all. All the stuff's completely declassified, completely out there in the public domain, but still makes for an interesting story. And, even though it's been declassified, the public doesn't know a lot of this detail of what went on in that secret war in Laos.
I mean, this is the thing is that, and with doing my books as well, that there is a great deal of information and documents if you search around, as you just said, but it's not pushed. So you really have to dig, and really it takes a gentleman like you who was there to know, okay, I'm on the right path here. I got to dig a little further. There may be a name of a base or a town or something, or a person mentioned, so it takes a lot of research to find those documents, that will make sense to anybody, right?
Yeah, no, it does. And the classification, often the U.S. gets accused, and I think sometimes rightfully so, of overclassifying stuff. But to get it declassified and be able to get those stories out there is important. And one person, and particularly in the SOG community, that we all thank and are grateful to is John Plaster. He really put out that first book
Yeah.
that went into detail about those missions, and we might talk about that later. My second tour flying Cobra gunships, I flew with a unit that supported MACV SOG. But in that mission, on that second tour, same thing. Come on, well, what'd you do? I flew Cobra attack helicopters. Well, what'd you do with it? Well, can't really talk about it because of our, or at least the ones where we provided support to MACV SOG. But now, thanks to John and his putting all that story together from his experience at CCC, and those stories out of the teams out of FOB2 out of Khartoum, he got it out there. He got approval to publish that, and that has opened this up for so many people to tell their SOG stories. It's great.
So when you were flying over the trail, I mean, I've met a lot of guys who were there on the ground with the SOG teams,
Right.
and they said that really many places it wasn't a trail at all. It was like a full blown, highway or freeway. And what the NVA would do is they would kind of tie trees together and create like a bridge of trees. So from the top, you would think it's just a trail, quote unquote, right? So in your experience, like, were you privy to see the actual photographs that the plane flew, or was that handed off the moment that you landed? A technician came and took that away and it was gone and you guys never knew?
Yeah, no, we could see the films. We had our own intel section in the company there at Phu near Hue
Yeah.
in Vietnam. And our guys would develop the film. We'd usually go in and discuss with them because we'd do a visual. Those photo missions were daytime missions, and those were our armed aircraft. We'd fly two A Model Mohawks armed with 2.75 rockets. And before I got there, they'd also had pod-mounted 50 caliber machine guns and take pictures in the daytime. The reason for the armament and the flights of two were if one aircraft went down, his wingman was there to provide support until the helicopter could get in and hopefully get them out. Though we lost a lot of guys, never recovered. Too many guys. So we did see those photographs. We did see the trail. I will say that a lot of the trail was open dirt highway that you could see, crossings that were bombed. It was clearly visible. Other parts of the trail were deeper in the woods, covered, as you say, with vegetation canopy. I didn't really appreciate the extent of that at all until second tour. I know we're probably not going to talk a whole bunch about that now, but second tour when I was captured as a prisoner, I was force marched all the way up the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I didn't see a vehicle trail until I got all the way up by Highway 9, I think. So like halfway up the trip, it was just small jungle trails with porters carrying things, pushing things on bicycles, foot traffic without any. They weren't bombed at all. I didn't see any bomb craters the whole way. So you're right. The trail network was some highways were covered and concealed, some highways were open, and then a large number of foot trails and footpaths going up and down the ridge of those mountains.
What I was amazed at is that when the history people like myself flick through any Vietnam War book, you're going to see that the Ho Chi Minh Trail with the NVA with bicycles. They didn't often ride the bicycles, so they just loaded them up and they pushed them, which is like, it was a very. I must say that from everybody I've talked to who was there, that they were very. They really thought outside of the box. To get, and I mean, credits, I think I feel comfortable enough to say that they were a well-trained army. They weren't like they knew what they were doing. And now, did you like the other thing about the trail is it's kind of a sidebar is I didn't realize that, Cubans were there, in their engineering, group that were helping them build the trail. So that was interesting reading for me last year. And
yeah, I've seen stories about Cubans. I've heard reports of Cubans even participating in interrogations and all. I've not talked to anybody prisoner or otherwise, with firsthand knowledge of Cubans. I never saw a Cuban, so I cannot speak to the veracity of some of those stories about Cubans at all.
Now, I suppose I should tell people that because of Bill's extensive history, and I like to keep these to an hour, the first part will not get into Bill being shot down and captured. That will be on a second one, because I really don't want to rush Bill. It's an amazing story.
And that's, that'll keep it in chronological order too, which could otherwise maybe get a little confusing. The
Yes.
first book I wrote was my book about my P.O.W. experience, because I really felt driven to get that story out there, being a different story from most of the P.O.W. stories, which are about guys shot down and captured in the North. I was shot down in the South, whole different experience living in cages and all. So I wrote that first, and then this one about my first tour is the one that was just released on November the 5th. So it's kind of backwards. But yes, we'll start chronologically at the beginning and go forward. Thank you.
Now, did you find many of the other authors that I've talked to who were, combat veterans, that it was kind of, therapeutic to write a book, and also they did it for their family, because after years of being asked, hey, Dad or Uncle, or hey, John, what did you do? It was like a purging of information. And so my question to you is, what inspired you to write books, and especially the POW book, about a very painful part of your life?
Yeah, well, and as I said, I think my primary motivation was that it was a story that I felt strongly needed to be told, that had not been widely told. There had been very little written about the Southern experience. One by a guy named Nick Rowe called 5 Years to Freedom, that was about the Southern experience, and not much else. So that was really my motivation. It was difficult. It was a painful time. And I had talked over years to groups for leader development classes or whatever about my experience, but it was always very peripheral, just kind of, yeah, I got shot down, I did this, blah, blah, and 15 minutes later, you're done with that talk. To write a book, to get to the level of information, the depth of stuff that I had to share in the book, I really had to sit and relive those things. I'd spend, and I usually wrote in the evenings when things quieted down, but I'd spend many an evening just going over and over and over and over one specific thing that happened, to try and recall it as best I could. And then also to do some supporting research to be sure my recollections were correct. I tracked down everybody I could that was with me, either in the unit or as a POW. I did archival research, and so I really immersed myself in it. That was a painful process. That brought back some bad dreams again when I went to bed at night. Almost didn't finish it. I got a few chapters into it, and I generally share it with my wife, who turned out to be my first editor, to look at it. And I got a little ways into it, and came to bed one night, and I said, Melanie, I am done with this. This book, I'm not going to write it. It's not going to be written. I mean, I may have wanted to, but I'm not doing any more of this. And she said, why? What? And I said, well, it just seems like a series of unfortunate events. Who is going to want to read it? And she said, hey, Bill, I know your whole story. I know how it ends. And I know that this could be a motivational story for others. It could even be helpful for people coming back from deployments. So with that, I went back to my computer and wrote and wrote and wrote, and I finished the book. And in doing so, I took her, now we're back to the POW book for just a moment. But in her words, I really tried to be as honest and open in this book as I could of the impact of that experience on me, the problems that it caused me when I got back, my challenges and readjustment, and how I dealt with those, things that helped, things that didn't, and how I got through all that. And it does have the ending is a very happy ending to that book. So I did accomplish that. And that was my motivation. That's why I wrote it. That was the effect on me. And I think once it was all done and completed, in spite of the bad dreams and bad memories, I think it has been helpful and a positive experience for me.
In the beginning of my quest to get my SOG friends to talk about things, there have been a lot of men who said, I just don't want to talk about it. I haven't talked about it. I carry a lot of pain from that. And I never press people about those moments. I'm pretty good at reading people's eyes. And but there was one man who said, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about it." And his friend came on and was interviewed with a few other of my podcast people. And then his friend came on, the one who said he didn't want to talk about it. And he said, "You know what? It's really helping me out. Just talk about it, and just, physically, just to talk about it and feel good about mentioning those words." And, at the flip side to what you said, I hope that by sharing these videos or interviews, that it does help some of the younger veterans to find a safe place. It's okay to talk about it. You don't have to share everything. Keep that private, but some of it's good to talk about, right?
It is, and I've confirmed. I've stayed doing. Well, I did a full 30-year military career, and then I've been associated with work with the military ever since. I'm going to retire at the end of this year, but my wife says I say that every year. But I did a lot of work with Stryker Brigade combat teams out of Fort Lewis, Washington, and dealing with guys when they came back to try and get lessons learned. We do some video interviews, and and then that led to working with some of the soldiers and the mental health professionals at Madigan Medical Center, and found out that what we were doing was helpful. The mental health professionals said the best thing that you can do if you have suffered trauma, if you have any form of PTSD, is to talk about and share your stories. And I agree that is so very important. I also agree with your observation that so many people don't want to do that. I didn't want to do it at all. Wanted nothing to do with talking to anybody. I'm not going to go into detail. It's in my first book about my POW book, but something happened that opened me up and caused me to be able to talk. And that was just in a nutshell. I was at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center in Denver. There was an invite through the hospital for a former prisoner to talk to a group in town. I was the only prisoner left in the hospital because I had a malaria relapse. Everybody else was released. I finally got talked into doing it because it was for the survivors of Bataan and Corregidor. Their group was meeting, and I couldn't turn them down. And I felt very awkward. But once I got before that group and talked and had the interaction with them, that got me out of my shell. That was the best thing that ever happened to my mental health, was that night, and opening me up to be able to talk about my experience from that night forward.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention before on another podcast that my aunt's family, unfortunately, she's passed on, but they were Dutch, and her father was in the Dutch Navy during World War II. And long story short, he was captured by the Japanese, and he went to various camps. And the Japanese colonel went to kick him. John, this individual, moved out of the way, and the colonel broke his toenail. So out of frustration, he told his Japanese, sergeant to pull out his toenails. So this was a story that I was told as a kid. Yeah, John doesn't really talk about it, but it was always, to me, I want to know not all of the story, but what is the truth. And about probably 5 years before he passed away, and John was the head of the family. He was a big man, and he was a no BS guy. And if he wasn't happy, he would definitely tell you. So I've always been around veterans, and I think I have a way of navigating it in a respectful way. And I asked him about it, and he told me the full story, which included just that. And it was also after he came home of what he had to do for his health as well. But anyway, going back to your OV-10 days, did you ever engage the enemy with the armament that you had on your plane?
Yeah, almost daily.
Okay.
And yeah, OV-1, we sometimes get confused with the OV-10, which is a fine aircraft, but we always consider the Grumman OV-1 to be a much better aircraft. Yeah, we did. We went out armed for our self-defense. I wouldn't be alive today if we didn't have armed Mohawks. I'll tell that story in a moment. But at the end of the day, if we were fine and we're headed home and we got wings full of ordnance, we generally call an Air Force FAC, or we'd see a target on our own, a legitimate target, and expend our ordnance on it. Coming home, we had to be careful after a while. Some bad word came up through channels at the Air Force hierarchy. I mean, we all got along fine at the tactical level. At the Air Force hierarchy, they were complaining about Army Mohawks being reported getting battle damage assessments forwarded up from the Air Force FACs for targets struck. So we were told to knock it off. Well, what we ended up doing was, just if we'd work for a FAC, we'd tell the FAC, hey, give this BDA to somebody else. Don't report it as coming from us. But it put the ordnance to use. And we didn't want to come back with rockets still hanging on our wings when they could do some damage to the enemy out there on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
So did you have to follow any kind of rules of engagement, or you had a free pass that, as long as you were able to, confirm that that was enemy on that trail, that you were free to engage them?
Yeah, that was it. Confirm was enemy, because anything moving on the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a legitimate target.
Okay, wow.
Never engaged anything other than a clear military target, either identified by a forward air controller or identified by us. But we legitimately did use the weapons for self-defense when needed. On the first, in fact, I may put out a thing here of trying to find these guys. But on the 1st of March, 1969, I was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in my Mohawk. I was over a particularly bad part of the trail when I got hit, and the aircraft initially was out of control. The right wing, when the leading edge was shattered, the right engine was blown apart. We had shell fragments in the cockpit. It was in a bad way. I regained control. I got the fire out with our fire bottles and slipping the aircraft, but I couldn't maintain a level flight because of that shattered right wing. Every time I try and level off with the power of my left engine, it would start to roll to the right. So I had to do a steady descent. Got as far away from that extremely hostile area as possible, but was still over enemy territory when I ejected at a very low altitude. In fact, by the time I got the observer out, we were coming through the trees in a right bank. I got a very short parachute ride. We had ejection seats, ejected. I got a partial chute deployment and hit the ground. But it was an Air Force 20th Special Operations Squadron that got an aircraft in there, a Huey, and got me picked up and got my observer picked up. And while we were waiting for the Air Force Huey to come in, my wingman with ordnance was slowing down the enemy that was quickly in hot pursuit, small arms and machine gun fire. So without armed Mohawks, without my wingman there to provide supporting fire and suppress the enemy or slow the enemy down, I wouldn't be here. The guys, can I say the names of the guys here that were on the 20th SOS? If anybody's listening, 20th SOS that knows any of these guys, I'd love to get in touch with them. There were 2 UH-1s out of Udorn, Thailand for the 20th SOS. In fact, I'll just read, these are in your book. This is how I came upon Jason, was I found this book and found this account. It's just a short paragraph. March 1st, 1969. 2 UH-1Fs of the 20th SOS from Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand, one crewed by Captain James and the other crewed by Captain Harkness. That was the pilot and the co-pilot, and Staff Sergeant Adams, flight engineer, and Sergeant Lloyd, flight engineer. That was the aircraft that came in and got me and my observer. The backup Huey, was crewed by Major William Bunn and Major Paul E. McClellan, with an unknown flight engineer and with 2 unknown flight engineers. We're flying a support mission for CH-72 in Laos when they heard a Mayday call from a U.S. Army OV-1 aircraft. The OV-1 had been hit by enemy ground fire and the crew ejected near Saravane, Laos. The UH-1F, piloted by Captain James, successfully rescued the 2 downed OV-1 crew members in spite of heavy enemy small arms fire and 50 cal machine gun fire. So those are the crews. If anybody knows Captain James, Captain Harkness, Sergeant Adams, Sergeant Lloyd, or Major Bunn, or Major McClellan from the 20th SOS, I would love to get a hold of those guys and give them a very big thank you from this Army aviator.
Well, I can definitely put this podcast into where they need to be, because I'm part of a couple of those groups, and I think if I don't have the connections to help you out, I would be surprised, or at least some information. So I will do everything I can to help you. That would be really neat to be.
And Jason, I thank you for your book because I didn't have those names until this was only recently that I came upon your book, found that in the book, and got those guys' names.
Wow, that's cool.
Yep.
You're making me get a little bit teary here. So I just want to touch on this, just so people know how dangerous that your missions were. There is don't want to. I don't want to screw this up, but so there were 18 out of 18 planes. There were 15 that were shot down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I
Wow.
can look up exact tables, but yeah, it was most of the when I got to the unit, just about three-quarters of the aircraft had been lost,
Wow.
with several crews. In fact, there were more crews killed and missing in action than guys that had been rescued at that time.
Wow. Wow. So now with your OV-10
One,
one, sorry, OV-1, where were you always at the same air base? Fubai was it always out of there?
we were Phu Bai was our base, Phu Bai, South Vietnam, and we were always based out of there, except uh, we had a once a week mission that would RON remain overnight in Ubon, Thailand.
Right.
We went there to deliver an intelligence product to the 492nd Fighter Squadron. They had a night mission. We'd sometimes work together with those guys. We provided them some of our photos and intelligence work. So we dropped that off at Ubon once a week, usually on a Friday, and get to spend the night, come home the next day, which was always a real pleasure for Vietnam air crew to spend a night in Thailand. It's a short distance across Laos, but it's like you're on the other side of the world, completely different environment. And then in Tet of 1969, with fears of a recurrence of what had happened in 68, we evacuated all of our aircraft to Thailand for about a week, several days to a week during the Tet time, some of them operating out of Ubon and some operating out of Nong Khampha Phnom, Thailand for that period of time. The other exception was in May of 1969, we formed a detachment in Udorn, Thailand, that more directly supported the ambassador and CIA's efforts up in northern Thailand in the barrel roll. And that detachment operated out of Udorn. I was the ops officer, so I had to go up there once every week or two and check on those guys and be there. But we always made fun of the guys in Udorn. They were getting credit for a Vietnam tour, living in a hotel in downtown Udorn. Now, the missions they flew were very dangerous and hazardous, so they still had that, but they were living a good life when they weren't flying.
Yeah, actually, a few of my friends who were in SOG, they also served in the 46, so special forces, and that's again, you're kind of skirting the whole CIA thing, right? I try not to really enter that vault, there's a comfort level, so I don't, yeah. But my friends who were there said, it was quite an interesting thing, and they were doing more training than engaging.
Right.
Yeah. Now here's a kind of an odd question. Maybe it's not super odd, but with the SOG guys, if they went to Thailand, the things that they would bring back from R&R would be a Rolex watch, the Pepsi Cola watch, is like with the red and the blue. I think that's what they call that model. Or else they would have a sapphire ring, or else they would have the war pendant. There's a fake one that I made up. You can't see it with the camera, but it was war. It said war, and it was like it was the anti-peace sign. So
Right.
what would pilots bring home, like, or back to base? Like, what was I got to have one of those.
Um, Most of that kind of stuff would come from Bangkok, and we did
Okay.
get to Bangkok on occasion, but not frequently. It was mostly Ubon, Udorn. These are more remote towns in Thailand. They still had things to buy. Guys would get sapphire rings, particularly a trip to Bangkok. We had a jeweler that they would deal with for the flights to Bangkok, pick stuff up, and star sapphires were a big draw. In Udorn, we'd pick up, you could get suits made. I never did that. There are places that would make shoes and boots. They trace and measure your foot and do custom made that. So that was a big draw. What else did we get over there? We'd always bring back some, what was it? Oh, Singha beer. It was popular. They had a small space in the Mohawk. We could fit a case of beer in there and bring it back to Vietnam from Thailand. And then we had our party flight suits made over there, and our patches made over there in Thailand. But that was, yeah, mostly that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it seems to be quite a crossover there, you know.
Yeah.
Well, how long was your sorry, I'm just thinking here. Your flight on a fixed wing aircraft, you were there for a year. That was your tour.
Yeah, the tour was a year. I ended up staying for 12 and a half months. I extended for a couple of weeks. But yeah, the normal tour was 1 year.
And so after you were shot down, were you fine as far as physically? Did you or your other crew member suffer like a bad back, or I mean, were you off duty for a bit?
Yeah, for a little bit. The when the 20th SOS picked me up, they took me over to, we were closer to Thailand, so they took me over to Ubon, Thailand. I was put in the hospital there for a few days. That was an interesting few days in the hospital. I think it was the day after I went down. The guy that was flying my wing and another pilot came over, and they got one of the barmaids from the bar at the Officers Club, Irene, and showed up by my hospital bed with a bottle of champagne, a couple glasses, and this barmaid. The head nurse was a cranky old Air Force nurse, but she kind of turned her head away and looked the other way. And they popped the champagne. We all drank champagne. Irene gave me a big kiss, and yeah, I improved rapidly from there. Was released from the hospital, 2, 3, 4 days after that. The unit sent a Mohawk to Thailand to pick me up, flew me back to Phu. It was quite a homecoming. The commander had the unit in formation on the ramp.
Oh,
We taxied up, and it was a formal formation with the guidon bearer, our little unit flag there, and he brought everybody to attention, and they saluted. I opened my canopy, saluted back, and that was my welcome home to the unit. Took me a bit to get back on flight status. I had a bad cervical strain, but it was very painful. Apparently nothing broken, at least it showed on the x-rays. But because I had been working on my right seat, we didn't have command ejection. We each had to eject ourselves. My right seat was slow to go, and we're getting lower and lower, and the aircraft's starting to turn as I'm leveling into the trees, and I'm beating on him. And as soon as he went, I pulled my ejection upper handle, and my head was still off to the side. So it messed up my neck pretty good, which still causes me problems today. So the docs were reluctant to let me back on flight status for a while. But I finally, I badgered them enough. I got back on flight status within about another week or 2 weeks. I forget exactly. And back to flying missions with the unit for the rest of my tour. Yeah.
wow. And just to take a step back here, just so the people who are listening to this know, your chute did not fully open. It was like, I mean, like you said that you were, you came basically crashing down to the ground, right? Quite hard.
Yeah, I think the picture, my wingman took some pictures, and somewhere I got a picture of my, yeah, good thing we have ejection seats because you see the wreckage and you can see the aircraft is upside down. You see a little bit off the chin of the front part of the aircraft and a little bit of the rear fuselage and the tail, and that's about it. The rest of it's just ashes where it exploded and burned. I went out, I remember going out and I remember feeling a puff of the chute and think because you kind of black out with a number of G's, and then I remember seeing a little bit of green. I remember feeling a puff of the chute and then hitting the ground. So I didn't get an oscillation, but the chute did get enough to open and break something. I didn't have any further injury other than just banged up and sore from hitting the ground. But it was a close call. It was outside the published Martin Baker envelope for that particular seat. It was an MK5 seat at that time. We were probably going, I don't know, 60 or below 80 knots, certainly, 70, 80 knots, and in about a 6-degree right bank when I punched out. So it was a short
Wow.
parachute ride, not a full chute deployment, and I was on the ground.
And now, are you guys armed like with a sidearm or something, or a car 15, or like Did you carry anything, or you were?
When we get to second tour, I got an interesting story with that, but I had a car 15 on the second tour for all the good it ended up doing me. But no, and part of the reason for that was first tour, we had a Smith& Wesson 6-shot revolver is what we had in how do we carry? Oh, I used to carry it in a hip holster like a cowboy on my with my survival gear. And I got on the ground and I was almost immediately taking fire. There's including machine gun fire on the ground. I was pretty close to getting captured that first time. My wingman immediately started putting down suppressive fire. I got him on the radio and I pulled out my 38. And about the same time he's broadcasting, he said, "Hey, I'm going to fly in a direction you should move to move away from the enemy and get towards an area. I think we might be able to get something in to pick you up." So I'm doing that and looking at that 6-shot revolver I'm holding, and I said, "Hey, this is not going to be a Custer's last stand here. I got 6 shots, and I'm ejecting bullets and putting 6 more bullets in this revolver. That's no." So I holstered that thing and took off in the direction he told me to move, and move for I don't know. It seemed like an hour, maybe it was only a half hour, but it was a good ways until that helicopter. I was constantly moving until the 20th SOS got in there to pick me up. In fact, my nickname before then, I don't know where this came from, but it was Wild Bill. But after that day, my wingman gave me the nickname of Lightfoot after running from the enemy for all that time until the 20th got in there to get me out.
So on your person, would you have I think it was like a PRC radio, like this small little radio, and you're able to talk to
Yep. Yeah, had a small radio, could communicate with him, and he was making all the Mayday calls and working all the SAR effort. But yeah, I could talk to him.
Okay, so after you finish your first tour, then you make a an interesting change. And it wasn't uncommon for a fixed wing pilot in your era to go into your rotary. Is that the correct terminology, or?
Yeah, no, it was from fixed wing only to rotary,
Yeah.
or what they call is dual rated, fixed wing and rotary. Yeah, most of the fixed wing guys that I knew wanted nothing to do with helicopters. They enjoyed flying fixed wing. They liked those missions. They didn't want to get down there that low and slow, mixing it up daily, inserting and extracting troops and all the stuff the helicopter pilots were doing. They wanted nothing to do with that. Yeah, so my motivation was yeah, a little, I don't know, it's different, but it was certainly my motivation as a young crazy guy that I was. And in my book I illustrate some tales of some of the nonsense I did, lucky to live through with some of the crazy stuff I did with that airplane on my first tour of duty. But I did enjoy the gunship mission. That flying A model daytime photo reconnaissance missions was my favorite. I flew all the missions the unit had. I flew the B model side-looking airborne radar. I flew another mission that wasn't real popular because it was a hazardous mission as well, flying that night infrared. We'd be down in valleys over there in Laos, flying at 1,000 feet or sometimes below, with a horrible navigation system. It was an old Marconi Doppler that would fail half the time, and I don't know how many Mohawks have flown into mountainsides because their Marconi Doppler was off. But I flew that mission. But my favorite was that A model, 2-ship armed missions in the daytime. I really got into the strike missions, the delivering ordnance on target. So when I came back, I went to the Army, had a wonderful program, sent me to college for 2 years to finish my degree, and then on orders back to Vietnam. And I was supposed to go back to Vietnam flying Mohawks again on a second tour. But I had heard while I was in college that this row with the Air Force had reached a crescendo pitch, and the Air Force had made such a scene that the Army finally removed the ordnance off of even our special mission unit. We were the only armed fixed wing unit in the Army at that time, and they took the guns off of our Mohawks, so the guys had no more ordnance. And I said, I called my assignment guy. I said, "What are the chances of not going to back on Mohawks, beginning a helicopter transition with a Cobra attack helicopter qualification en route for my second tour?" And they said, "Hey guys, sure, we got lots of guys that want Mohawk assignments. If you want to go rotary and into Cobras, we're happy to do that for you." So that was what drove me then with no regrets ever, still to this day, into helicopters and getting qualified in the Cobra and going back over on my second tour of duty.
Now, for the non-experienced pilots that are watching this, is there any crossover between being a fixed-wing pilot and a rotary pilot? Or is it a completely, I mean, I know flight, I'm sure there are aspects, but I mean, a helicopter is much harder to fly than a fixed wing plane, right?
In some, it's certainly different in some aspects. Yeah, I'm smiling because it just brings back memories of my initial flight in my rotary qualification course. The aircraft that we used was a Bell OH-58. That was our small observation helicopter.
Loach, is that what it was called? A Loach?
Well, the actual Loach was an OH-6 built by Hughes Helicopter, which most scout helicopter pilots much preferred the OH-6 for a lot of reasons. It's a great little aircraft. For I don't know, there were conspiracy theories of the political implications behind it, but the Army moved to the Bell version of the observation helicopter, which was the OH-58. And that was also used in Vietnam. So both the OH-6 and the 58 were scout helicopters in Vietnam. So the OH-58 was our aircraft to learn to transition into rotor wing aircraft. I had been in helicopters a couple times before, but this was not much. But this was my first going to learn how to fly it. And I just remember the instructor pilot. We got in. He went through the start, showing me what he was doing, and then he picked it up to a hover, and we sat there for a minute, and I just felt like I was sitting on a magic carpet. I mean, it's defying all laws of gravity and physics and everything, and we're just sitting there off the ground, hovering, and that was great. And he took it off and got it in the air, and he said, "Okay, guy, you're an Army aviator. You can fly. Go ahead and take the controls," which I did. And it flew. He said, "You'll just notice that the cyclic, what you call the stick, the cyclic is more sensitive. You barely just have to think about moving it, so you don't move it like you did a fixed wing stick. And go ahead and take it." And the rudder pedals were a little bit different, but very similar. And I had no problem. I'm flying out through the countryside, having a ball, flying an airplane. And we got out to where our stage field was that we're going to be doing our work with. It's a little grass field, maybe, I don't know, maybe the size of a football field, roughly. And he said, "Okay, I'll take it and shoot the approach." So I turn the controls back to the instructor. He shoots the approach to the little grass field, comes to hover. He said, "Okay, you can take it back again." So I took the controls. I don't think it was more than about 2/10 of a second. And that aircraft was completely out of control. I felt like I was balancing on a greased beach ball, just couldn't, it was, and so he took it back and laughed. And he said, "Yeah, as soon as you learn how to hover, we can sign you off as a helicopter pilot." That is the biggest challenge with a helicopter for a fixed wing guy is, and maybe for anybody, is learning to hover that aircraft. It does take a special skill set to be able to do that. It's not one that takes a long time to learn. It was within, well, just some more practice that day. I could at least hold it for a little while. And within about 3 days, I was perfectly safe, though not exactly precise, but certainly wasn't real dangerous, and just hovering that thing around after about 3 days. And yeah, that's the biggest challenge with a helicopter is hovering, and you work in a different environment with, you can't do it with a fixed wing. When you hover down and there's trees around, you got little hover holes and things. You need to be very, very aware of where the tips of your rotor blades are in relation to anything around. And generally with a fixed wing, you're not getting that close to things that you worry so much about the wings hitting things as you're flying through. But a helicopter, when you get down there low among the trees, you got to be very, very cognizant of where your rotor blade tips are and your tail rotor.
I think that you just used the correct term to what I'm going to ask you about, because I saw on TV once that a helicopter, not in combat, had crashed because they were quite close to the ground and there was like dead air. And I was trying to understand that. And they were saying that sometimes you need that cushion of air to keep you up. And in some applications, it isn't there. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself correctly or not.
Yeah, it's not so much because when you're near the ground, you're going to have you got a lot of rotor wash coming up when you're near the ground. We had a condition when you're up higher, out of ground effect. Sometimes you can get into a condition that's called, what is it? I'm trying to remember. It's been so long. Settling with power. I think you can get where you're just pulling out all the power and that thing just starts settling and you can't recover. It'll go all the way to the ground and crash. So you need to be careful of that. If you're up at a high hover and you feel that settling, before you get any lower, you need to lower the nose and get out of that so you've got some air to fly through. Because yeah, settling with power, you can get more of a descent. You can no longer have the power to recover it, and it'll go all the way into the ground.
Wow. So we're doing quite well here for time because we've got about another 15 minutes, and then that will be perfect because the next time that we meet, we can talk about the other events. But for right now, so you're stateside, you've done your training, you're now a qualified helicopter pilot. Now this is quite late in the war. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean a lot of people were seeing it winding down, right? This is like 1971-ish. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I got back from Vietnam in November of '69. As I said earlier, I got accepted into a program called degree completion. In that day, you could get a commission in the United States Army without a college degree. In fact, we had some general officers without a college degree back then. The Army had decided they wanted all their officers to have a degree like the other services. So I got into a program called degree completion. I went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha for it was a year and a half, not quite 2 years, to finish up my bachelor's degree, which I did, and got on orders, went through the helicopter transition, the Cobra qualification, and then back to Vietnam on December 7th, 1971. So that period of time had transpired. The Nixon was the president. Vietnamization had taken place. We were withdrawing. In fact, we'd withdrawn hundreds of thousands of U.S. forces from Vietnam. The war was winding down. It was being turned back over to the Vietnamese, and yeah, ironically, well, I guess there's two ironic things. We talked earlier about me coming in the Army and when I came in and I enlisted, within a year after the Tonkin Gulf incident, and at that time the war was very popular. And I was on the heels, and the draft was still going on too. But we were fighting in Vietnam. The U.S. destroyers had been attacked in the Tonkin Gulf. When I went and enlisted, much of the country in '65 was saying, "Yeah, get over there and kick those commie bastards' butt and stop them over there." And so I went off with a big hoorah when I left. Now it's hard to understand because today, and particularly younger people, the little bit of history they get, which is not very much, regrettably, but they hear about the protests, the unpopular war, which it became, but it was not initially. So that was interesting at the time. That's one aspect when I went in. The other, now going back on my second tour of duty, all this Vietnamization's going on. Things were quiet after, we look at Tet of '68 and look at that as and it was a horrible thing, but it pretty well destroyed the Viet Cong guerrillas in South Vietnam, and they weren't much of a threat anymore at all. So by the end of 1971, when I got over there, I was really afraid that the war had ended and I was going to miss it now as a Cobra gunship pilot and was going to have nothing to do. In fact, in my Cobra class, we had, I don't know, roughly a couple dozen guys in the class. Just before graduation, in fact, it was largely on graduation day, they changed a bunch of orders, and there were only about a half a dozen of us who continued on to Vietnam. The rest of the class got their orders changed to other assignments because there was no need or requirement any longer in Vietnam. Yeah, so I show up in late '71 thinking I've missed the war. In fact, when I got to Vietnam, I had to fight and argue at every level I went through to not get ripped off for some headquarters because they said, "Hey, guy, you're a senior captain now, second tour. We need you on our staff here, staff there." But I said, "No, I want to go to a tactical unit still in the fight." And so eventually I was successful and got up, assigned to the 361st Aerial Weapons Company, call sign Pink Panthers. And they were another special mission kind of unit. At least their mission was to support MACV SOG, CCC. That was their priority, almost exclusive mission. They had some other missions, but that was their priority mission, was support to Command and Control Central out of FOB2 at Khartoum. And I did successfully get up there. When I arrived, it was quiet inside of South Vietnam. There were no American ground forces left in that part of it. That was the Central Highlands 2 Corps. All
Wow.
American ground forces were gone. There was us. There were some Air Force forward air controllers and maybe some A-1s out of Pleiku Airfield, and the Special Forces guys up at the FOB, and then all the aviation units at Camp Holloway, Army aviation units, and that was about it up in the Central Highlands.
Wow. I mean, even SOG had changed its name at that point because the press were aware of it, right? I mean, in the beginning, it was Mac SOG, and then it was, MACV SOG, and then it migrated to, the other names. But because
I'm trying to remember, it doesn't roll off the tongue very well, but
like T41AE, or, those kind of.
it was their mission had changed to supposedly primarily training, I think, the South Vietnamese. They were by directive restricted from cross-border operations then. Though my first mission, and we'll get to this in another podcast, I guess, in my first book, I wrote about my P.O.W. experience. It starts with my arrival in the 361st Pink Panthers, tells a little bit about their mission. My first mission, I didn't even get my checkout ride yet. And we had this big mission over the border in Laos in January of 1972. And I got scarfed up by and I was a captain. Some first lieutenant came up and said, "Hey, new guy." I'm trying to remember. I wrote that so long ago, and it happened so long ago. But it was essentially, "Hey, new guy, you want a medal?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Come on, come with me." And I said, I was trying to say, I'm not legal. I haven't had my checkout yet. And his name was Mike Sherman. And he drugged me over and put me in the front seat of a Cobra and cranked that sucker up, and off we went. And we landed up at Dak To to get a briefing. But there was a team that was in Laos that was in serious trouble. And I think there was they thought there was one or two survivors still out there. A Jolly Green had been shot off. In fact, we were at Dak To. This Jolly Green was parked there full of holes. I think two previous attempts have been all shot up, and we were going in for the third try to get this guy out of there. There was somebody on the radio, but it was not an American. It was an indigenous voice, and so there was a worry that it was just a trap for helicopters out there. But we went out and got the guy. We got some support from A1s, and so that was a team that was not. It was not a normal SOG team out of FOB2 with a couple Americans and the indigenous guys. It was a team out of Thailand, I was told, out of NKP, and the guy that we did end up getting out on a string was an entire indigenous survivor of that team. But yeah, so that whole point was, even though the SOG guys out of CCC were not, and I don't know if they had any missions, but by policy, they were not going over the border anymore. We did have that mission in Laos, and we had other missions that we would go out to a comp site called Leghorn, which I'm sure you've heard of, to provide gun cover to resupplies out there. We did have the recon teams were still doing missions, though, out right up to the border of Cambodia and Laos, and what was bad guy country out there. We didn't have any security out there. So in the Play Trap Valley and all that, they were still doing missions, and we still had some dicey recoveries with the guys under hot pursuit, that we had to pull them out on strings or ladders to get them out, and shooting our Cobra fire very close to the friendly Special Forces guys as they came out. Yeah.
I know that for the NVA, their tactic that they would like to do with you guys is allow one chopper to land and then not attack him, and then the second one that they would get him, right? They kind of give you some confidence. Hey, there's no one here, So we're at an hour here, but just as a tidbit for our next podcast that we'll do. Your involvement, maybe next time we can talk about a little bit more about your interaction with SOG guys while you were flying the Cobra. But later on, that you would meet two other SOG men during your more unpleasant stay. And one I had never heard about. Unfortunately, I don't have my note.
Earl Edward Flora.
Yeah, I've got him here. I had never heard about him. I thought it was only John, Cavalloni.
Yeah, Caviani.
Yeah.
Yeah, Flora. Who knows why there's not publicity about guys or anything. And I ended up with a few interesting special forces characters, which I can talk about all of them. But the two SOG guys were Flora, who was, and I tried to do some, he's passed away long ago, and he was a quiet guy that never talked very much about his experience. I think he got out of the Army shortly after he got back. He had been shot in the forearm, and his arm was, I don't want to exaggerate, it wasn't a 90-degree angle, but his whole arm, it went up and then his arm went down. And of course, the communists never did anything for that. In P.O.W. camp, he'd salute like that. And he said he was not going to get it fixed when he got home, but he did. So at any rate, not too much that. We can talk about those later. But yeah, those are the two SOG guys I was with after I got captured.
Yeah, and then the thing I was reading about him, and he was hanging from a string or a rope from a Huey and being extracted, and a bullet cut through the string, and he dropped. And that's apparently that's what it said in this document. But you would know better. And I did try and unfortunately his daughter, she did write an article about her father. Which I have here, but I was trying to reach out to her, but then I found out that she's passed away too. So that's yeah, that's unfortunate. Did you see? I was able to find you in a few old, newspapers. Did you see those?
I saw those. They arrived, this afternoon. I was amazed at how you found all that stuff. One of those I had never even seen. It was about a visit to a small town in was it Newman, California. I passed through there. So yeah, good research work. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'll dig around, some more. That's kind of one of the things I enjoy. It's been so long for you guys, and I'm not a real computer geek, but I can navigate myself, and I'm part of a few different websites, and they have these big collections, and it's just like digging through stuff. So for the public, I will end this first podcast. So thank you, Mr. Reader, there for your time. I hope that you enjoy your trip to Southern California, and hopefully the weather is good there.
It's got to be better than it is here.
Oh yeah, it's probably, I don't want to look out the window. It's dark now anyway. But don't go anywhere. I'm just going to end this, the interview for the public, and we'll talk to you again soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
This dirty old part of the city where the sun refused to shine. People tell me it ain't no use in trying.